Okay. And we're live. Okay, welcome back, everyone. You're back on the Mind Meld PR Breaking News vlogcast and podcast. I'm your host, Jonathon Narvey, the founder of Mind Meld PR. And I'm here today. I'm so excited about this. I'm here today with Jimmy Thompson, managing editor over at the Capital Daily News. And we're here to talk about why people don't trust the media anymore. So I should, I'm about to ask Jimmy to give us a little bit more of a background on him, but I'm going to do a bit of an intro, and then you can feel free to add to it. But I want to sort of kick off before we get into the actual conversation. This seeing that poll and polls like it and news coverage about this poll, it's a bit of a bummer for me as a PR guy who gets news coverage for his clients. It's like the whole thing, the value that comes from this is credibility. So if people are not trusting journalists, that's a problem for me. It's a problem for the people who work with me. I guess that goes double or triple for you as a reporter. So I want this to be sort of a wide-ranging discussion on what actually was said, what are the findings, what are the trends, what's led up to this, how do we get out of this mess? So hopefully this will be an insightful conversation. So Jimmy, I discovered you. I don't know if you were asked or voluntold to appear on this podcast. But I'm so glad that you were recommended to me. And forgive me that you weren't on my radar before. I know I'm in contact with a ton of reporters, but I run into the usual thing of we're basically hairless chimps, and I can only remember up to 150 people without tools, and you should have been on my radar earlier because I've been taking a look at your work. You are a phenomenal writer.
Thank you.
I haven't taken a look yet at your video work. I assume it's equally great. There are reporters, and then there are people who can present facts and stories, do the actual storytelling. It's an art and a science, and I've enjoyed reading some of the articles that I discovered in the last few days. So thank you for your work.
Thanks very much.
Who is Jimmy Thompson? He is a journalist. And he has, so rather than go through his job title, I just sort of want to, I'm grabbing this right from your website. I've gathered audio from the Seal Watooth, I'm messing that up, the pronunciation, no doubt. The Seal Watooth, thank you, Sweat Lodge. Photos of a Syrian prosthetics workshop, video of crab fishing on the Russian border. In pursuit of a good story, I've slept on converted Russian spy ships, Chinese farmers' plank beds, and in a tent under the midnight sun. My work has been translated into, I'm not going to name off all these languages, there's many, many, many. And once a nationally syndicated comic strip. You're the successful version of what I aspired to be when I was younger. So.
Well, thank you. I don't know who you wanted to be when you were younger, but I assure you it's not me.
Is there anything you wanted to add for context?
Yeah, I mean, I was a freelancer for many years. I worked for CBC and as a staffer at CBC, and then as a freelancer for the Narwhal, and published in the various places across Canada and elsewhere. I started working with Capital Daily in November, so I'm pretty new to this job as an editor, but it's a whole different ballgame. It's a really interesting challenge to be on the other side of things. I always assumed that editors kind of, just sat around throwing a ball in the air and catching it and waiting for their writers to get back to them. But apparently there's a lot more to it.
That's not what they do. No, I know it's a whole other kettle of fish. So fantastic. So you are exactly the kind of person that I would want to be interviewing about this topic. You've got the experience and the insight. Let's just get right into it. I'm going to list off a few of the things that jumped out at me from this Edelman report, which is called the Edelman Trust Barometer 2021. And it's got some facts in there that this was shared with the Axios news outlet exclusively, and then some of those findings have been reported more widely now. No, I mean, on one level, maybe this isn't surprising to a lot of people that the findings show that trust is at an all-time low. And I'm going to read a little bit of this Axios article. So let's see why it matters. So faith in society's central institutions, especially in governments and the media, is the glue that holds society together. The glue was visibly dissolving a decade ago and has now, for many millions of Americans, disappeared entirely. So some statistics that back up this opening paragraph. 56% of Americans agree with the statement that journalists and reporters are purposely trying to mislead people by saying things that they know are false or gross exaggerations. And 58% think that that most news organizations are more concerned with supporting an ideology or political position than with informing the public. So those two statistics alone, this is roughly the equivalent of if you hired, I don't know, a plumber to fix your toilet, and you were of the opinion that 58% or 56% of plumbers, you got to be really careful who you hire, because over half of them aren't just going to not know how to fix your toilet; they're going to make the problem worse on purpose. This is sort of the level of trust in reporters. I think there's a suspicion that this is purely a Trump era phenomenon. In fact, what the Axios report says is these numbers are echoed across the rest of the world. So here in Canada and abroad, they're mostly not a function of, as Axios puts it, Donald Trump's war on fake news. So we don't have a misinformation problem. We have a trust problem. Okay.
I would argue we have both.
Well, all right. So what's your initial response to that article and some of the findings that I was putting out there?
Yeah, it's just lob a hand grenade over here and say, all right, what do you think? There's so much to that. I mean, I don't even know where to start. So yeah, okay, let's start with the earlier stuff, like the chronologically earlier stuff, where we're talking about this being a long-tailed issue that goes back a long way. There's so much to unpack. So let's start with social media. So that's an easy place, because I think that's right, that Donald Trump is not the cause of this. Donald Trump is a symptom of this, and he capitalized on this low trust in the media, and he hammered at it, and he made it worse and worse and worse. And I think that's sort of indisputable. But he didn't cause it. He just saw that there was an opportunity there, that people already didn't really trust the media, that he had friendly media that he could sort of say, these are the real ones, and the rest of you are not, everyone else is fake news. And now Fox News too is apparently fake news in the mind of him and his supporters. But even before all of that, there was social media, and what social media did was two things. Yeah, like I said, there's a lot to unpack. It's like a choose your own adventure of explanation. But one thing that happened is that anyone had the ability to become a publisher. Before, journalists had been the gatekeepers. We had been, the source of information. If you wanted to get something in the newspaper, you had to send it through these people who were generally first of all, white, middle class, upper middle class men, which had an influence on what made it into the media. But it also, they were also educated. They were usually, I think, operating with some kind of idea of what the public interest was. So, it had pros and cons, but what happened with social media was the doors got thrown open, and suddenly anyone can call themselves a journalist, and anyone can, journalism was no longer seen as like a profession or even a trade, it was an activity. So from, small reputable outlets to huge, horrible sources of misinformation, you have this huge proliferation of media. And what that caused was a general lowering of the standard. Some places still have extremely high standards. New York Times still fact checks everything that they publish. Many magazines and newspapers still fact check everything they publish. A lot of places are somewhere in the middle in terms of relying on factual information, but not having the resources to necessarily check every single fact. But they are, and when they get something wrong, they correct themselves. But we've got just an enormous media ecosystem now. So when you say journalist, even that word doesn't mean what it used to mean. Some people have a master's in journalism or PhDs in journalism, which I think is crazy to have a PhD in journalism, but these are people who are really, really in the weeds. And some people have, no education whatsoever. That doesn't preclude them from doing the act of journalism, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have that sort of shared standard of what journalism should contain and what it should mean. So I just threw a whole bunch of stuff back at you there, but the other major thing that we should get into at some point, if not right away, is the media economy and what's happened to that since 2000 or so, or slightly earlier.
I absolutely am looking forward to getting to that part of the conversation with you. I also, maybe I'll give a little bit of context from where I come and how I've evolved in my position on this. I grew up, well, let's face it, I'm a million years older than you. There were pretty much three main news channels when I was a kid. And if it was said on television, it was correct, or at least it was assumed by me as a kid and my family. Like, there was so much more trust in media, and frankly, all of our institutions, in the military, in the cops, so trust in general has definitely gone down. But yeah, honestly, as the years have gone by, I have I went from kid to student to I started out in journalism, and like I said, you're the successful version of me, because I had sort of a middling journalism career before sort of switching over to the marketing and PR side, where I found these abilities an ability to tell stories came in useful for companies. So better fit for me. But getting back to it, as I adulted, I started seeing the cracks in the wall, and it's like in the Matrix. At some point I took the red pill, and I don't know whether I sort of diluted it and this was building over years, or I can't pinpoint the moment when it happened. That it's somewhat ironic, but like I have a natural BS detector. Anytime I read an article, watch a TV show, listen to a podcast or a radio bit, I'm always picking out, what is the thing that doesn't add up? What is the thing that they're not telling us? Why aren't they talking about this? Why aren't they asking this question or that question? maybe that's a common thing that all of us do, but
I don't think that's common enough. I think that's an extremely important impulse in media literacy. If you're not questioning who didn't they talk to, what questions didn't they ask, what presuppositions sort of underlie this whole premise of this article, that's what we need more of. And I think what's happening isn't that there's more of that happening. I think that what's happening is that for the first time, people are being exposed to those questions, but without the context of that those questions have always been there, or those questions have always been there, those problems have always been there. Who has the power, who's talking, who isn't talking, those are extremely important. But we just never questioned it until the last maybe 10, 15 years. But you mentioned having a lot of trust in the military or in cops or in government. Like in the 1970s, we weren't in Canada, but the US military was invading Vietnam and bombing civilians with napalm. The cops were beating up black people and killing gay people in the streets. Governments were doing horrible things overseas and at home. Like we've always had institutions that are not worthy of our trust. We just trusted them anyway. And part of that is because we had a mainstream media that was essentially complicit in those things. Because the perspective of the mainstream media was considered to be objective, and that objective perspective happened to be that of rich white men.
I'm going to push back on you slightly. I'm not a big fan of sort of identitarian politics and sort of the the whole rich white men thing. It's like I agree with elites are trying to propagandize us, and I guess my take would be there's more than one group of people behind the scenes that and power takes many forms, and you've got sort of competing groups trying to influence. So but
if you look at who were the elites throughout the entire, well, most of history actually of modern history, you're thinking about a rich white man. That's not, of course, it's not the only person that ever held power.
That is a truism. I agree with you that, of course, statistically, that's 99%. My point is that skin color, gender, those kinds of attributes that are physical attributes, maybe have to the extent that people are trying to perpetuate certain narratives and certain stories. It's less to do with skin color and gender than perhaps that there are maybe cultural class issues there. Like I literally don't know what ideas would come to someone based off of skin color or gender or immutable characteristics. So
I certainly don't think
my point.
I certainly don't think it's immutable characteristics. I think it's that the social strata that were available to people of the people who look like you and me were different from the social strata that were available to, for example, Indigenous people in Canada. And Indigenous people in Canada, partly as a result of this, suffered extraordinarily at the hands of the media for all of Canadian history.
Yeah, take your point, 100%. So I didn't want that to be a roadblock to the conversation. Just I wanted to sort of
let's move on. Yeah.
Let's get to the one of the interesting parts that I wanted to discuss with you was, as you alluded to earlier, the business model of media and how this has gotten us to the result where it's you would think media outlets would be not just about making money, but a primary motivation for them would be retaining the trust of the audience and in fact taking on more readers, more listeners, and if they don't have the trust, that's a problem for them. So how do we get into this vicious circle where they're sort of working against their own interests, either consciously or unconsciously?
That's a really good question. So I wouldn't necessarily say that they're working against their own interests, but the first thing I would say is you're absolutely right that that there is a cycle here. As media have had to shed jobs because of the changing business model, which we can get into in a sec, they have then also lost the ability to do the quality reporting that they want to do. And as they lose that quality reporting, they lose more subscribers, more advertisers, and it goes downhill. A perfect example of this would be Canadian Geographic, which has been an incredible magazine and still has great people working there and has, publishes good things. What they've done though, they've had to do as they've lost money, is they've taken on extraordinary partnerships with the oil and gas lobby, the CAP, Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. In doing that, they've not only sold out their own brand, but they've actually sold out probably their value to their advertisers, because people don't trust what they're reading in Canadian Geographic. So they don't trust when they see a CAP piece of essentially propaganda in Canadian Geographic that's not labeled as sponsored content. So it actually undermines the very purpose of CAP wanting to advertise with them in the first place. And I think that's sort of what you were getting at earlier when you said that like low trust is a problem for you as a PR person. If people don't trust the media, then why would they want to why would clients want to advertise in the media or place advertorials or editorials or whatever in the media? But getting back to the business model, I think that started to erode during the era of the internet. I mean, everyone knows this, but people are less willing to pay for things that they found online. I think there's this sort of assumption that if you find something online, it should be free. And that's unfortunate because the media still costs a lot of money to produce. It actually costs probably a little bit less per article to make, because you don't need to send someone to the courthouse or to the library in person anymore. You can send them to Wikipedia. Well, no, ideally you're not doing your journalism based on Wikipedia, but you know what I mean. A lot of the research, a lot of the contact has become much cheaper, but it still costs a lot of money to make journalism. We still pay people salaries to do that work. But people don't pay for it anymore, and advertising has also gone out the window in favor of places like Google and Facebook. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. These are I love these points that you're making. Number one, saves me the time and effort of making it in a more clumsy way, and because we're on the same page from that standpoint. And I'm curious about a few things. So one is, you alluded to advertorials and paid content. And one of the things that came out of the Edelman study that was reported was, in contrast with the low trust in reporters, there's far higher trust in CEOs. And this coincides with the rise of the phenomenon of thought leadership, which, I again, not in my best interest maybe to be undercutting this thing, but just to, for those who are unfamiliar with what thought leadership is, or this is a buzzword, the basic idea is, this is getting often CEOs or other founders or executives writing articles about their big ideas that go into places like Bloomberg or Forbes or the Wall Street Journal or Inc.com, and something like, this is how I built a business, or this is how I failed and failed and failed and then succeeded, or here was my magic idea that I had that I love the stories of redemption, where it's like, yeah, we went off the rails and then we got back on, and here's how we did it. So it's a very popular and increasingly popular form of contributing content to outlets. And of course, this is part of what we offer, is helping founders to craft their messages. Sorry about the plug, but yeah, I'm curious about what you think about this trend, and is it healthy? And go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'll start with just advertorial generally. I think that advertorial
Mm,
doesn't necessarily mean, bad journalism. It doesn't
mhm,
necessarily mean it's not good for the reader. I think advertorial, done properly and done really, really transparently, can be fine. It can be as good as a product that wasn't paid for by someone outside of the organization or
mhm,
by the subscribers.
mm,
Um, as for the thought leadership thing, I, it's not a substitute for journalism,
mm.
is what I'll say about that.
Complete agreement with you.
Yeah.
Yes.
So for sure that it can help a business or a founder or a CEO get their message out and maybe help people be inspired by them or help people find ideas. It's like a TED Talk or something can be really
Mm,
a great way to get some new ideas in your mind and to try and understand how someone did what they did.
mm,
But journalism at its core is about holding truth to power, and it's about investigating those CEOs or other powerful people, and about holding them to account. And you're never going to get the people that are left behind
mm,
writing a thought leadership column in Bloomberg. That you're never going to get the workers who were poisoned working at the meatpacking plant, or sorry, not poisoned, who were infected with COVID at the
mm.
cargo plant in
Right.
Alberta. You're never going to get those guys writing a thought leadership piece. Their bosses, however, probably could. So, who has access to these platforms is really worth considering.
Mm,
Um, so, that's not to say that those voices are not valuable. Like the voices of the CEOs are not valuable. These are people that have done great things, that have probably have great ideas and think about these things a lot and have the ability to reach out throughout their network to other people who have great ideas, and they can,
mm.
I'm sure that they've got interesting things to say.
Yeah.
But if we're thinking of that as a a more trustworthy source of information than journalism, absolutely not.
Very good. Terrific. I think one other aspect that I wanted to touch on there was you talked about the quality or the work and effort and resources that go into quality journalism, and how those resources, the money just isn't there as much as it was in the past. So again, growing up in decades past, I remember when investigative journalists were uh, that's all they did was they would write these 8, 10, 15, 20 story series on something going in depth, undercover. And I know this is still done, but it's hard to do. It's harder to do. It's harder to fund. I see journalists doing effectively crowdfunding in order to go outside of the system. But you've got. I don't know if you saw I think there was a film called Spotlight from a few years back about the years-long investigative coverage of abuse in the Catholic churches in Boston, and like that kind of journalism, hard hitting and you know going into places no one very few people have access to in order to get facts that people want to hide. That is so hard to do now. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I have a lot of thoughts on that. um, so first of all, I think that kind of journalism is still done. And it's not only done at the New Yorker. For example, we just hired George Packer to write a 30,000 word piece on coronavirus, where from start to finish of the pandemic, and it's been incredible piece. It took me a couple days to get through, but I got there. Um, but at Capital Daily, I'm going to do my own plug. We've got Tori Marlin, who is probably 4 months in or more. She's been working on a story since before I even got there, and she's working on it every single day. This is a huge investment for Capital Daily on this investigation, and that's what she does for a living. She does every single day. She works on this investigation. Um, when I was a freelancer, I got picked up by the Narwhal to do an investigation that took me I think 3.5 or 4 months on the treatment of fisheries observers on trawlers on the West Coast here, and we got results. It's not that people aren't able to do it anymore, it's that the resources are much rarer. So whereas you might have had, at the Times Colonist, you might have had 2 or 3 investigative reporters on staff in the 80s, they don't have any real investigative reporters now. They're great reporters who do great work, but they don't have the resources to do a months-long investigation anymore.
Right. Now, I want to tie this back to the whole trust issue, trust in media. And so if it's not transparent for people, the idea here is, from my standpoint, journalists who are paid less or don't have the resources to do their jobs properly will look for other motivations, other incentives in order to keep doing what they're doing. And in fact, new journalists who have no prospect or very, very dim prospects of, being the kind of journalist who gets on TV and gets book deals. And, if they think, hey, I'm good, but I don't know if I'm going to be great, I might be a Jonathon Narvey kind of journalist. If the money isn't going to be there, what's the other incentive for me? Well, I'm going to speak to truth to power. I'm going to change the world. And this is where, this is what they talked about in the Axios article, is this perception of ideology influencing stories. And I think this comes back to journalists appearing to be motivated because they are activists more than they are journalists. And I feel like this trend of, stagnant or declining pay rates for journalists at the same time that, social media was taking off, it has created this real change in where the people who called themselves journalists, say 20, 30 years ago, there's in some cases not a ton of overlap, in at least in where motivations come in for why they're doing the work. But I'm curious, I'm not the first person to I didn't come up with this hypothesis. I like to give credit where it's due, so I'm trying to remember who I'm stealing this from. But I don't know if you have thoughts about that.
I absolutely have thoughts. Okay, I'm gonna stop even saying that because it's anyway. Okay, so first of all, the salary thing is absolutely true. Journalists are underpaid. That's across the board. There's very few journalists. I think in the States, if you work for NBC or something, you can probably pull in a couple, 6-figure salaries for sure. Not very often, especially not in Canada. Most journalists, especially young ones, are working for, $40,000, $50,000 ish. Is probably an average salary in Canada for journalists. But I wouldn't say that they are out there instead of, taking like some kind of revenge on the world or something in exchange for not getting paid. I think it's more that they're that's the only people that are well, okay, so there's another thing that's cropped up. That's the only people that are able to and willing to work in journalism, is people that want to do that work. They want to hold the powerful to account, because they're probably not, they could make more money going into PR. There's 4-to-1 ratio right now in Canada of PR professionals to journalists. So that says something about the amount of money available in different fields and the number of jobs, frankly. But this whole sort of idea of activism, one man's activism is another person's like baseline truth. And I'm not questioning the notion of truth. I'm questioning the notion of objectivity. I think that the idea of objectivity or neutral ground is wrong. It doesn't really exist. No person can claim that they hold the neutral ground. You can say there are facts. I'm not questioning once again, not questioning the existence of facts. That gravity is real, climate change is real, but 10 years ago, if you were to say climate change is real, that would have been seen as an act of activism in the media. Like
Actually, can I interject? I think this is an interesting point.
Yeah.
Because actually, it's an interesting point where we actually may divide here. And if it hasn't come across already, I'm a little bit right of center, not very right of center, but someone, and sorry to go on a bit of a tangent. Someone, a relative, said to me some years ago, you know why I love Fox News? They were talking about themselves. You know why I love Fox News? They just run things straight down the line. There's no bias there. They're totally objective. And I sort of looked at them and I was like, that's interesting. I don't know what to say. If you can't recognize the bias, if you can't see the bias, that's your bias. That's how you know.
And anything looks biased to you. Anything,
the
truth looks biased to someone who themselves is holding a bias.
Right. So I thought it was interesting that I know we don't have like hours and hours to spend on this. So I know you were trying to make a cogent, succinct point, but it was the you were like, okay, there's facts. There's gravity exists. There's something else, and then the third one was climate change exists, and I'm like, hold on. We know the climate changes. Actually, everybody, left, right, in the middle, 100%. I don't know a human being who would say the climate does not change. But then that is a loaded phrase for some people of a certain. So it's like, okay, let's break it down. Are we talking about natural climate change from volcanoes? Are we talking about it from man-made? Are we talking, and what about the consequences? Are we saying if climate change exists, we must do X, Y, Z, or is there openness to different avenues for resolving this problem? And it's like, so I guess my point would be, we need to ground our conversations in media and elsewhere in a shared reality. And it's so easy to get tripped up, as I just did, over things that should not be loaded terms, but maybe are. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not going to debate the reality of climate change.
Let's not.
I will say, as an environment journalist, I am deeply disappointed that I haven't gotten through to you yet, but we'll get there. But where I was going with this is that journalists are people, and people have opinions, and people have biases, and people have histories and cultures and all kinds of things. So to say that journalists have some claim to a neutral ground, or should pretend to have a claim to neutral ground, is wrong. Just because you couldn't see Walter Cronkite's tweets doesn't mean that he didn't have opinions on things. He now it's a little more evident out there that you can go on Twitter and you can see some idiot like me shooting his mouth off about whatever thing. Just because I'm able to express that today doesn't mean that if I was doing this job 15 years ago, I wouldn't have had those opinions. I just wouldn't have had a place in public to share them.
That's an interesting point. That sort of a lack of transparency into the thought processes day to day of previous journalists created this sort of illusion of that they were more objective.
Yeah, and I think that illusion has been broken, and I think that has contributed to the loss of trust in media, and that's not good. But at the same time, it's inevitable. Journalists are people, but what needs to happen is that journalists need to regain that trust, but by doing their jobs and doing it well. And I think a lot of them are out there doing their jobs and doing them well. Journalists are out there every day trying their best to interview a person that they may completely disagree with and to give them a fair shot. even someone they're investigating for something that they did wrong. They're reaching out to them, and not just because they're legally obligated to, because they genuinely want a more complicated picture of that person. Villains are boring. But what's much more exciting and much more interesting is someone complicated who has thoughts and feelings about the world, and talking to that person is going to help you understand how this happened to begin with.
You know, that's such a great point, and I feel like that's actually where a lot of the media sort of went off the rails. And the point I'm referring to is about, as you said, boring. Sorry, villains are boring, and you want sort of more of a nuanced. You know, where is the there's actually a gray area here. What's going on here? And I don't want to. We actually don't have the time to get into a big thing about the whole Trump era that is swiftly, thankfully, receding into the past. Yeah, that whole people close to me have, on occasion, sort of questioned, or maybe not even questioned, just sort of like straight out, "You are a Trump supporter?" And my response was always, no, I'm not. Number one, I'm Canadian. I don't have a dog in this fight. Number two, my issue, as I alluded to before, as being sort of a skeptic and being red-pilled, was it's always the shoe on the other foot test. And it's so I feel like a lot of reporting went off the rails for 4 years, more than 4 years. With Trump castigating him as this villain, where if he said something, it had to be wrong, and so you had these bizarre situations of if Trump reversed himself, suddenly reporters and columnists would reverse themselves, their own positions. It was boring. It's like, here's the bad man. What he says is bad. Here's why. A stop clock is right twice a day. So, you know, there has to be something in there. And again, not a supporter, just a sort of, you know, Trump era is done. But, you know, by the standard of how media reported on Trump, if I said that, you know, in the Trump era, there were 7,000 soldiers in the Capitol protecting the White House, and that on his first day of his new term, you know, Trump, the dictator, was legislating from the side of his desk as opposed to approaching Congress with 15 new executive orders in a single day. He would, you know, people would be like, "Oh, he's a tyrant." Silence from the media. So again, that's not a pro-Trump position. That's a sort of a like, what is going on here? Kind of like, if the people are seeing a bias in the U.S., how much of this is reflected in reality versus just they've been brainwashed, they've been propagandized?
Yeah, I mean, I think that. Sorry, I'm just looking up. Trump also governed mostly by executive order. Like, just
so I just what we're comparing here is, I think it was you know, Obama sort of ratcheted up the executive orders. Trump did more than Obama over the course of a 4-year term. And Biden was like 2/3 of the way up to Trump's entire total over 4 years in one day.
No, he's only issued 21 at this point. And
you understand that's not like, he's supposed to go to Congress like that, whether it's Republican or Democrat. That's like, and again, I don't want to.
We're getting way into like U.S. here.
Sure.
But I do get your point, though, that, you know, that it definitely appeared that everything Trump did was bad automatically, and that he didn't necessarily get a fair shake when he did things that otherwise people might agree with. I mean, I don't know. I don't cover U.S. politics. I followed it raptly like the rest of the world because it was the biggest sideshow in town. But it definitely, I can see why someone, especially someone conservative, would get the impression that it wasn't being treated fairly, especially when he did things that seemed logical, like a giant tax cut, like that was greeted with great skepticism. Personally, I feel it's very skeptical of it, but I can see why people who might have broadly agreed with it would see why didn't get a fair shake.
Sure. Let's put that aside. The reason I brought that up is because it's mentioned in the Axios story and the Edelman poll. This sort of, this actually didn't have to necessarily do with Trump. This alludes to the part that you were talking about at the start of our conversation, where you were talking about some of these shifts that predated that era. And also that I'm in 100% agreement that this was a symptom, not a cause. I totally agree with that. I think, is there another issue, putting Trump aside, putting politics aside, just an issue where you feel that people were divided in the States or here in Canada, that where it seems to be ideological more than it should be, and I don't know, is there a specific, maybe on the environmental side, getting back to that?
I mean, carbon taxes might be a good one.
Yeah.
A good example of that, where it seems like your position on carbon taxes is essentially your position on whether you vote Liberal, vote NDP, or vote Conservative or Green. When ultimately it's an issue of economics, it's an issue of whether climate policy is effective. Whether climate change is real, I guess is potentially a question someone could ask.
Can I interject?
Sure.
Climate change is real. I disavow any clipping of this conversation that alludes to the contrary. The climate does change, and humans have an effect. Okay, sorry, carry on with your point.
Yeah, so like ultimately, carbon taxes should be an issue of economics, not an issue of politics. Because really, the question should be: does it have an effect? Does it have a positive effect on people's behavior or companies' behavior? Does it lower carbon emissions? And there's a lot of studies out there. There's a lot of information about whether that's true. But what happens is essentially that the media that has aligned with carbon taxes is much more willing to entertain stories in favor of it, and the media that has disavowed carbon taxes will always run stories that are skeptical of it, or columns or whatever.
Absolutely, and of course in Canada this crosses over not just the carbon taxes. It's the energy industry as a whole. So again, if you've got a position on carbon taxes, it's probably even affects how you feel about whether or not people should have jobs working in the oil industry in Alberta, which sort of going broader than that. This again, I'm picking up on something that's probably, I think Sam Harris said this a couple of years ago, noted that if I know that you smoke cigarettes, I probably know a lot about you, aside from the fact that you smoke cigarettes. Like just that one variable alone can tell you maybe a lot of, or two or three variables like that. And I'm going to know what you think on 12 different policy topics, which didn't used to be the case. Jonathon Haidt has mentioned this. So I'm probably, I'm getting out all my fanboy mentions of all the podcasts that I watch. So this has been a great conversation, but I didn't want to end it without getting your thoughts on how media gets out of this and how society gets out of this. I mean, I'm assuming that more trust in media would be a good thing. People not thinking that everything is ideologically constrained is a good thing. Or I guess now that I think about this comes back to something you said earlier, is just sort of maybe people should just recognize there's no objective journalists out there, and no objective publications. Everyone's taking a certain side. So just be aware what the bias is, what is, and maybe journalists and journalism producers need to be just more transparent about this. Is, hey, we're coming at it from this angle.
So I'm going to push back on that a bit.
Yeah.
So when I say that journalists are people and they have opinions, I definitely don't mean to say that the journalism that they do is pushing a particular direction. So that's sort of the distinction that needs to be made, is that, and this is really the tricky thing in journalism, because every decision you make as a journalist has an ideological component. Like we were talking at the very beginning of this conversation, who you talk to, who you don't talk to, what questions you ask, what facts do you include, what context makes it into the story. All of that, even if you're a video journalist, what shots do you get? What angle do you shoot from? What lighting? Everything could be construed as a decision that you're making for a particular, in service of a particular point of view. So the point I'm trying to make is not that journalists, we should just accept that it's a free-for-all, everyone's ideological, and everyone is pushing a particular point of view. What I'm saying is that journalists need to recognize their own biases and really work to confront them. And media consumers need to recognize that journalists are people who have biases, but who are really trying not to push a particular point of view. And in most cases, I believe that's true. If you go and work for The Rebel, you probably have a very particular ideology. If you go and work for Press Progress, I don't want to equate those two things. They're not equal. The Rebel is not a journalism outlet in any way. But if you go and work for something like that, you have a very specific ideology. And if you go and work for something that's more progressive, you probably have a very specific, or at least you have an ideology as well, probably. But that doesn't mean that the people who go and work for the Globe and Mail wake up every morning and just open up their book of facts and absorb their facts for the day, and that's the only thing that they think about that day. Like, of course not. They're human beings, and they have ideologies. But what they also do is they work really, really hard to call up people at every level of of their story, and get their point of view and try and understand what the story is and what the forces are at play, and then to honestly and transparently communicate that.
Yeah, I agree with 99.9% of what you said there, and I must apologize for misstating your position. I actually didn't mean to do that, so thank you for clarifying. And
No worries.
No, I think that this was that was terrific. I think maybe we may have been talking past each other a little bit, in that like I totally recognize. I agree with you that journalists, a lot of them, maybe the vast majority, are not knowingly letting their biases impact how they report things. And in fact, that's probably day one of if people who go to actually go to journalism school before they become journalists. It's probably like day one is like, do you know your biases? What are they? Do you know how to look out for them? Do and sort of how to be responsible around that? But it's also like I like again, me being the skeptic, and maybe more so whenever I'm checking out, say, a new show, I'm looking for what the bias is, because I know there will be one. And so to me, it's more about I would be great if every on the masthead or right below it of every publication, they just said, yeah, these are our values. This is kind of how we're reporting. We do have a mix of this, and that, and if that's the case, and hey, take it or leave it.
Yeah, I didn't really get to the point that you were asking about originally, which was how can journalists work this way, and how can people understand what like how do journalists go forward, I guess, from here.
Yeah.
And from my point of view, I don't think it's something that, you know, people just need to get used to. I think that what it is journalists need to keep doing their jobs, and they need to do them better, because journalists have screwed up big in recent memory. Caliphate being a notable example with the New York Times podcast, where they relied on sources that very clearly had a particular agenda that wanted them to think that there were you know, terrorists behind every corner back in Canada and back in the US. And then they let a source completely lead them astray, who was making stuff up. And then when that came out, they did in some ways do a good job of apologizing and retracting the podcast, but then at the same time, Michael Barbaro's fiance had worked on the show, and he was Michael Barbaro, the host of The Daily, was out there being the interviewer of the I think the managing editor of the New York Times. So like, you need to separate people from their obvious biases, like whenever you can. And another thing is just, I think that journalism, news journalism, really quick, you know, sort of one-off stuff where you don't get the chance to have any context and you don't have the chance to explain to people what's really happening in this story, is ripe ground for people to lose trust in the media, because they're going to see what's missing, and they're not going to forgive you for it when they know the story better than you, and you miss what they know. They're going to think that you're deliberately doing that. You probably aren't, but they're going to think you are. So one of the solutions to that is writing longer, and that's what we're doing at Capital Daily. To do yet another plug for my own outlet, is we're writing long about Vancouver Island. We're writing stories that we want to help people make sense of Vancouver Island through investigative reporting, through long form, through explainers, and a lot of this is just trying to get into the real nuance of an issue.
Jimmy Thompson, this has been a wonderful conversation, and I really appreciate your time and your insights. I've learned a lot, and yeah, thank you very much. So if someone wanted to find Jimmy Thompson online, where would they find more of your journalism?
Well, they can find more of my journalism at Capital Daily, or my website is jameswsthompson.com with no P in Thompson. But my Twitter is probably the best place to find my incoherent ramblings and misguided opinions. And that's at JWS Thompson. Once again, no P in Thompson.
Okay. Jimmy, it has been a pleasure. I'm so glad to have met you. And thank you very much for those who have been listening. So you have been watching and or listening to the Mind Meld PR Breaking News vlogcast or podcast. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, please like. If you're in the market for PR services, maybe throw us some money or get us to work for you for that money. So fantastic. Thanks very much, Jimmy.
Thanks,
I hope to have you on again at some point in future, and at the very least, let's stay in touch. Thank you very much.
Let's do it again.
Okay.
All right. Talk to you later.